Hello, story seekers. I'm Ben.
I'm Nico, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Welcome to this Write Like episode.
As you know, in these episodes we talk about famous and infamous writers while tackling prompts in their honour.
Style, structure, or tone, we intend to see what happens when we borrow from the greats.
Our writer today was so prolific and so successful that they even get their own adjective.
He was a prominent social critic, campaigner for children's rights in Victorian England, and writer of 15 novels, 5 novellas, and hundreds of short stories. We've gone for none other than Charles Dickens.
Dickens himself.
Dickensian.
I use that word way more often than I think you're meant to.
Yeah, quite possible. It's just it's pretty crazy. If you think about other authors from the period, like other very famous people that were writing, so like Oscar Wilde jumps to mind. We
Yeah.
don't say like Wildian, do we?
No.
So he
Would you say Wildian or would you say it's wild?
Wild. You just got to force pronounce the E on the end. Wildy.
Oh, no, I don't like that.
He was just head and shoulders above, I think. It's difficult to compare people to him because he's just
Yes.
so prominent.
I read an interesting thing about him, which was that because his writing tended to be episodic,
Hmm.
he would read what people were saying about the characters and change them if he wanted them to be more popular or less popular based on what people's opinions of them were.
Interesting.
So yeah, if you wanted someone to be a real bastard, he'd have to. I've got to bastard them up a bit. People like them.
I wonder. I mean, that's very similar to this. What people suspect has happened with this Game of Thrones George Martin thing, isn't it? Like the book was so long in coming that people have figured out the various twists, meaning that it's actually he's sort of in a corner because he can't use any of the twists that he was going to use.
I've got some big money ideas for you, George. Either it's all a dream that Eddard Stark's having, or aliens.
I think Aliens is basically there anyway, isn't it? With all the we are so far off Charles Dickens at this stage, right? Keep it to the Dickens man. Apparently, do you know Dickens is sort of seen as like a word replacement for devil? Do you
I
know when you
didn't
say
know
like
that.
what the Dickens? It's like a politer way of saying what the devil.
Oh, for the Americans listening, that is a thing we actually say. What the Dickens?
That being said, I haven't heard anyone say it in a very long time.
Well, now we have to.
They just go around, what the Dickens?
We're going to bring it back.
So the only other thing that people might have noticed is that there's a certain gravelly rasp to Nico's voice, which is because he's been singing all week in a recording studio and has performed as well at a live
Yes,
event.
it's big time for the band.
Big time. So Nico's band is Dead Man's Whiskey, and it's all going very well. They're in the process of recording their second album, and it sounds like it's a wild ride, but it's going well.
Yeah, it's pretty bonkers. We're in a studio that belongs to a man named Andy Sneap, who some of you, any music fans, might know is part of Judas Priest. So it feels a bit like we shouldn't touch anything while we're here.
And you're quite literally stood in that studio now because we're not in the same
Yes.
place. If you're listening, he is in a Judas Priest studio, and I am at home.
We're living very different lives this week.
Yeah, very much so. But if any of you are interested in hearing Dead Man's Whiskey, check them out. But also, there is a live Kickstarter for their second album, which has, I think, as of release, it'll probably have 7 days left on it.
Yes.
So please do go and check it out. And if you want to support Dead Man's Whiskey, then head over to the Kickstarter.
Someone's
really
got
are
to
very
pay for all
good.
these Quakers oats that we're eating. So
Quakers Oats. Yeah. So yeah, I think people were going to realise that your voice is mostly gone. But
yes, I can only apologise.
he is going to look after himself though, and he'll be.
It
He'll
is
be
going to
back.
make any attempt at voices hilarious. So
It might even bring you down to my level.
Well, with that being said, please, sir, can I have a story?
Too weird, I think.
All right, yeah, fine. That's fair. Okay, so we'll have 2 new stories this week, hopefully with some Dickensian flair. Ben, you'll be going first, and our prompt for this right like is certain perils.
Certain Perils. Arthur Peppersniff found the falsehoods of others endlessly entertaining. He was fortunate indeed in that regard to have found employment as a journalist at a paper working out of one of the many fine printing houses of London. John Pressing, the wily editor of the lofty periodical named The Social Crier, but colloquially known as The Gossiper, had put Arthur's talents and background to good use, naming him the correspondent to high society. Arthur could be regularly seen leaving his rooms in Pimlico and taking a respectable cab into the districts of Mayfair or Belgravia, or other such collections of wealthy households, then taking the fastest cab he could hail across the river to Lambeth. Once in the offices of the Gossiper, Arthur would chortle to himself as he scrawled out inch after inch of savage column fodder, before feeding it into the press as one might tip a bucket of slops into a sty's trough. At night, and no matter the season, the printing press would sweat ink as the nimble-fingered boys darted about in its guts with grease cans and replacement typeset. By the morning, the lolling tongue of the paper was cut and folded, bound in sheaves, and sent to the hawkers and delivery men, whilst Arthur Peppersniff slept contentedly in his bed. Arthur's innate mastery of smear came to the fore in the time he spent in those fine districts. There he would take tea with members of our nation's upper class. His charming appreciation for their time and clear delight at listening to them speak about themselves led many to believe that it was impossible for him to be the same man that was famous for pointing out other people's flaws and self-deceptions. Truly, his ability to extract the details of their lives over a sugar-filled tea service was remarkable. Invariably, those unguarded natterings would lead to the juiciest columns, and the Gossiper began to be delivered to the goods entrances of every curious house in London and beyond, even into darkest Kent, which may as well have been France as some Londoners were concerned. So it was that Arthur Peppersniff became a soiled name about town, and gradually began to find the doors of genteel neighbourhoods firmly closed to him. His salacious talents were then turned to the ever-grateful, emerging middle class, who were delighted to see their family names in print, regardless of the content crowded around it. Gone were the overweight duchesses, assuring him of their ageless perfection, the fine gentleman who claimed to know good horseflesh despite the damage putting coin on the nags had done to his estate. And along to Arthur came the wives of prominent tailors, who placed their endowments in a new pointless cause every week, as well as the miserly factory owners, assuring him of the necessity of child labour. It was during this downturn of his career that Arthur Peppersniff received a most intriguing invitation. He was invited to tea at noon the following day at one of the finest houses overlooking the park. The note was signed Captain Ragroutering, a name that Arthur had heard before from the lips of fat duchesses and spoken of with a lusty dismay by tailors' wives. The man was a supposed privateer, and his was a story that hardly needed further embellishment, so clear was its obvious falseness. To Arthur's mind, the opportunity was to find the strands holding such a man's web of lies together, and tug. The following day, Arthur once more took a respectable cab, and was greeted before the doors of the house by a footman in a green and gold livery. "This way, if you please, Mr. Peppersniff. The captain will see you in the parlour." "Indeed, thank you." Arthur followed the footman through the palatial entrance hall of the house, and was led into a large room that would have been well lit were the windows not swaddled in thick curtains. A strange spice lingered on the air, and Arthur could also smell food that had been left out. He looked down at a scuffling noise and saw a large dog restlessly napping by a bowl of overflowing and aging offal. "Don't mind the hound," came a gritty voice. "He'll eat when he's hungry." The sounds came from a tall shadow by the unlit fireplace. "I've no doubt, sir." Arthur looked around for the footman who had vanished. "Might I introduce myself? I'm—" "Captain," said the shadow. "Excuse me?" "I'm no knight, not yet anyway. Captain will suffice." "Well, Captain Ragroutering, I'm—" "Peppersniff." "Indeed, Captain." "Pull the shades, would you, man?" The request, although somewhat demeaning, was welcome to Arthur, who was finding the cloying darkness uncomfortable. He moved carefully to them and pulled the heavy fabric aside to let the sun in. The air was suddenly alive with dust motes. "I understand you write for that libellous rag. Many of my dear friends have appeared in it, though fewer of late since they took my advice." "I must say, I find that to be quite unfortunate, Captain." "Do you indeed?" "Perhaps we could take tea and discuss your exploits." "I think that would be unwise of me." "What have you to fear, Captain? Surely they are not all the tall tales of a sailor." "Whilst I would prefer to not have my neck stretched, there is little left for me to fear in this world, it's true. I invited you here, Peppersniff, to discuss certain perils." "Encountered upon your adventures?" "Encountered, Peppersniff, on yours. They say a man that writes only of himself is a braggart. But then what is a man who writes only of the failings of others? Having walked no life of his own, he delights in pointing out where others have chosen a wrong path. There is no pity in him, for there has never been love for him. Such a man makes enemies like a foundry makes cannons, and therefore faces certain perils once the fuses are lit." "You speak bluntly, Captain. I see now that your ruse of tea was only to be able to insult me in the, comfort of your home." "Being spoken of in an unflattering manner is difficult to hear, is it not? Imagine, if you will, that this were not in the privacy of my home, but instead in smudged ink on tomorrow's fish wrap. But no, that was not the purpose of the invitation. I set sail on the morrow for the Americas. I'm bound for waters no man has braved and lived to speak of. I do not wish to merely speak of it. I wish to engage your services as a chronicler, a biographer of sorts, and for you to join my expedition." You are quite deranged, Captain, if you think I would entertain such a wild notion." "If you'll have it that way, you know where the door is, Peppersniff." The captain surprised him by ending such a strange conversation abruptly, and Arthur made his escape with great alacrity, as one might from a mugger off Drury Lane. That night, after a fruitless day of searching for a story that would entertain both him and his readership, Peppersniff returned to his rooms and slept uneasily. He was awoken from dreams of tossing seas and grinning pirates by rough hands. 3 or 4 sets of them were bundling him from his bed. Arthur cried out when moonlight caught their features, and he saw their weathered faces, grimly determined in their task. One man thumped him when he refused to stop shouting, and the next Arthur knew of it, he was being dragged along a side street. The cool pre-dawn air let him know he was still wearing his bedclothes, and his bare feet slipped over the slick cobbles beneath him. The fear of what might happen if he cried out again stymied his tongue, and he found himself near paralysed by the anticipation of what could come next. Certain perils, the captain had said, and Arthur felt certain of them in that moment. Those dock workers who toil at the ungodly hours the East India set turned their faces from his pleading glances as he was dragged aboard a triple-masted frigate that waited upon the tide. Dumped in a small cabin with no ceremony like easily replaced cargo, Arthur stifled a scream when he heard the lock click behind his assailants. Self-pity governed him as the ship creaked under sail, and hours of rocking motion crept past. Raising his head from his misery, Arthur saw that in the small cabin was an uncomfortable bunk, a stool, and a small desk on which writing supplies had been placed. The light from the locked window fell in a glaring shaft upon that desk, and Arthur reached for it like a drowning man claws for the surface. He set himself on the stool and began to scratch at the paper with the provided ink. Though I have often dealt in the falsehoods of others, know this, reader, what follows is both true and terrifying. On the 2nd of June, 1841, I was summoned to the town-house of one Captain James Ragroutring, where I received a warning about certain perils I might face in my profession as a writer. Little did I know that within the mind of this rapacious privateer had grown a plot to abduct me as a biographer. Therefore, what follows is a true account of our journey, and I intend to leave nothing out.
I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Good.
I'll immediately say it had all the Dickensian hallmarks, and I think so much still of you that I'm now not sure how Dickensian your normal writing is. And I feel like I need to go back and look at it.
Well, possibly. I think there was
Maybe it's just tone. Maybe tonally it just hit exactly the kind of stories that you write so well. Maybe that's what it is. But
could be. There were lots of like quite deliberate elongation of sentences and
yes,
like moving clauses about so that they sounded a bit more Dickensian than how I would normally write them. Um,
yeah,
Generally maintained a bit of a lexical field, I think, as well, like that kind of refined older English.
yes, definitely.
Um,
There's some great phrases in there, by the way. Absolutely, like I absolutely loved column fodder as
yeah,
a term. Really, really good. Especially coming back and knowing what's coming and the allusion to the sort of battle hardened captain and talking about the making of cannons that ties in really nicely. It keeps that through line going brilliantly. I did also really laugh at Kent may as well have been France
yeah.
to some of the
That's,
Londoners.
that's actually something my partner said the other day, so I thought I
Oh
had to put it
wow,
in there.
that's well done, her.
uh,
Also, self pity governed him is a brilliant phrase.
yeah,
It
I think that's quite a Dickensian tenor phrase. That one.
Yes,
Um,
but it does so much with 4 words,
True.
and it's important because earlier in the story you say about how like no one will pity him because they never thought positively of him, and at the end all he has is himself, and he has to rule himself with that pity. That's yeah, and then of course ending up doing exactly what he said he wasn't going to do, and thinking he's doing it under his own steam even at the end.
Very much so.
Really,
He
really
sort of
nice, yeah.
tries to turn it to his own. Yeah, he turns inwards and has to reconcile with what he's about to do. So he's about to write this like scathing, disbelieving, um, long and hopefully publishable book about this rapacious pirate.
The Pepper Sniff, by the way, perfect Dickens name.
Yes, yeah, I liked it.
Absolutely perfect Dickens name.
Um,
Oh, Pepper Sniff.
so it's surprising how much goes into these like silly sounding names, isn't it? But I mean, to break it down, I obviously went for Peppersniff because he's nosy,
yes.
and when he actually gets his nose like full of the stuff, he loses control and like has to sneeze because it's pepper.
Yes.
Yeah. So that sort of like sets you up for what's going to happen to him, where he initially does very well in high society, but finds himself ostracized quite quickly.
It's also it's interesting, like the language of sniff. It gives that kind of animal sense as well,
Hmm.
and it it could be like a pepper smell or pepper snort, and it would change the way you saw like pepper snort. You think of being like pig like, but with pepper sniff, he's more like a hound. So yeah,
Yeah,
really, really, really good name.
and the ragroutering was also a word that I encountered the other day. So I haven't made that up. That's actually a word apparently.
Okay.
I follow an account online called Grandiloquent Word of the Day,
Oh,
which is just filled with some absolutely wild words. And ragroutering was one from like a week or two ago, um, and it just means playing the rogue.
okay.
So to have the captain that be the captain's name, it very much means that he's like donning that cap,
Yeah.
leaning into it, so to speak.
Oh, I like it.
Mm. Now I had a lot of fun with it. It came out pretty quickly, I would say. I think once I kind of got the pattern of the how I was going to put together the sentences down, it just sort of came out. Um, I liked it. There are some of these ones that have been a lot harder than others, and I would classify that one as one of the easier ones.
So before even reading mine, I had a similar experience of it. It seemed not easy to write, but easier to write. Um, it's like it felt like he wrote everything like it was a short story, and I think it does fit that style well.
Yeah, it
It's yeah,
everything's got to work on its own.
yeah,
Yeah, everything's got to work on its own. and the I guess what's the word for it? Sort of, the social satire that he goes for. Like, so obviously this you can see that in the story that I've gone for. Like, this guy is really tearing down the upper classes with his social commentary, which is something that Dickens did a lot to everyone. So as soon as you've got that into whatever you're writing, it sort of it kind of I found it to be a bit of a pace setter. Like, as soon as you introduce a character or a concept, you already have the point of view or the lens at which you're looking through it. Um, it's yeah, it's a fun way to look at writing, and to do it, as you say, like periodically.
Yeah.
Everything, inside of 1,000 or 2 words, there you need to have it all work together neatly and nicely. Um, I mean, I would say this feels, a few times in the past I've written stories for the bookcase where they feel like they need to be expanded in order to
Like
achieve their
part of a
potential.
greater story. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say this one for me doesn't feel like that, even though it definitely is.
It functions perfectly as both, and I think that's important,
Yeah.
especially for writing like Dickens.
So that yeah, that's I think that's my response to what you were saying about the periodic thing. Like,
Yeah.
this had to work on its own, but also had to feel like it was part of a larger thing. A lot of fun, and thinking about what 1840s London would have looked like is nice when you're
Yeah.
writing. I think, like, talking about like districts and stuff, because nowadays you can walk through Mayfair and not give a rat's ass. Like, it just nobody
It's
gives a
just
fuck.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it would it was a very established district back then. I read it was like a bit from like a rag newspaper, describing the different classes that inhabit the different uh, districts of London,
Oh
written from the
wow.
time. And it's, well, for a start, it's super racist. Um,
Oh no.
yeah, because it's talking about uh, like new money from India, and like where those people live and that kind of thing. Um, but it also is fairly sort of witty about where the middle classes are, and where the old elite are, and where the in between are, and it was pretty good. So I think I drew
What did
quite
it
heavily on that.
what did it say of my people, the humble cockney?
I think there was just a bit about, like, don't go into the smog,
Don't go east.
yeah, don't go there. Well, we've discussed mine and also Dickens for long enough. Let's have yours, my friend.
Well, we shall. Certain Perils. Ogleby had left his home in the pursuit of adventure, at the time knowing little of what it was that truly meant. After all, he knew of adventure stories, tales of daring do and the like, but if put upon, was quite certain he could not, even if pressed, tell anyone truly what an adventure was. Yet here he was, looking down into a mine shaft. It had been closed even before his father's time, he was told, when he had begun looking for the adventure. The signs that circled the cave's entrance, like sores around the gaping maw of death herself, proclaimed that this cave, Ogleby had decided that with no miners within it, he could rightfully call it a cave, was a source of almost certain peril. Of course, their words were not so flowered as that. Danger, they cried. Risk of death. But what was an adventure, if not a cave filled with danger and the risk of death? Ogleby's mind ran in a frenzy. If his books had taught him anything, there could be all kinds of wonders in this place. A dangerous cave could be home to fairies, with pointed chins and wicked little eyes, or to a slumbering lizard, a worm all curled about and filled in its belly with fire. It all, as far as he was concerned, stood to reason. It further, then, stood to reason that there ought to be a great deal of treasure somewhere at the bottom of this cave. Perhaps this is what the miners had mined for, he thought. Perhaps it was the great monster that scared them off. His head was filled, just for a moment, with the shrill voice of his mother. Get your nose out of those silly books, boy! Her head shaking, sending its great mass of chins quivering beneath it. Too much fancy in your head. Almost a man and not a thought for anything but goblins. She was wrong, thought Ogleby, for he was not fanciful. He was in fact learned, in a way that Mother could scarce comprehend. What could a woman he'd never seen without a flower-drenched apron know of the world of adventures? Father had died in a battle, she told him, so it was certainly in his blood to partake in the adventurous. Lucky I need not become a strumpet and turf you out, she'd also said. Ogleby had no idea what was meant by it. To the business of the here and now, Ogleby found himself in a precarious position. He'd never operated a winch, nor a crank, or truly any kind of device before today. He tried to twist the thing about to see it from the other side, but found it to be quite strong. The threads that held the thing were made of metal. Proof, if ever proof was needed, that this cave was filled with an adventure. Leaning his body forward, Ogleby looked down into the inky void, following the line of these metal threads. For a moment dread was upon him. It made his doe eyes water, his puffy cheeks quiver, his knees knock terribly, and his jellies, for that was what he called them, shrivel in anticipation of what may be about to come of him. He knew for a moment, then, that he was a coward, for he had never gone on any adventures before in any of his 10 years. He'd never chased a criminal across rooftops with a sword in his hand. He had never boxed a bear like a Russian hero. He had scarce ventured beyond the schoolhouse and his home. He looked into the darkness with all his fear in him, and felt for a moment the tug of spectres. His mind swam with the promise of ghouls and visitations of the truly damned. But this, he assured himself, is what adventures are, and it is crossing the gap of fear that qualifies you as an adventurer. He was certain of this, even though a part of him knew full well that, just as moments ago, he did not truly know what an adventure is. All that done, though, he embarked on one anyway. Spying a series of rods or rungs hammered into the mouth of the cave and descending into the darkness, Ogleby recognized his opportunity to embark. Putting first one foot, then the other, he began his descent into what could surely only be a fruitful venture. After not much time at all, he thought to himself that it had become rather dark. Looking up, he could see some light, but the precarious angle of his descent and the shade of the cave's mouth meant that little light got in. Lucky, he thought, I have a box of matches. He'd stolen them from the kitchen for his adventuring pack. It was less handsome than he'd hoped, no glass-doored lantern or great coil of rope to be found anywhere, but he did have matches. With a grasping hand, he brought the box out from his rear pocket. It was a little squashed, but still adventure-worthy. Then he tried to open it. With only one hand, it was hopeless. Slowly, he let himself turn to face the wall properly, and with some effort balanced on just his feet. He felt the world around him swim. Even if he could not see the peril, it was aware of him, and it tugged at his clothing desperately. Acting as quickly as he could, the box of matches was opened. Too quickly indeed. The inner sleeve flew wide, and with a series of taps and pings, the contents flew from their box and collided with the walls and metal bars. "No!" cried Ogleby, and, in a moment of panic, grabbed desperately at where he thought the matches ought to be. It became difficult, then, to know where anything ought to be at all. Up and down seemed to interchange. The walls were gone, then they would return for a moment to beat Ogleby's soft body, seemingly without mercy. It occurred to him that it was altogether too dark, and perhaps, a little too late, he was deciding he didn't like adventuring very much at all. He heard the impact before he felt it, his legs buckling like old trees in a high storm. Then all was nothingness for our adventurer, save a few fleeting moments, where the goblins and ghouls, and even the great slumbering dragon came to collect him and take him to their world of adventure. For his time in our world of factories and mines and newspapers was forever done.
That was really good. I had that such an interesting tone to that story to have this kind of like childlike adventure, but the adult viewer is just so horrified that this child is in this situation.
Yeah.
Some wonderful lines as well. I love the idea of this. It's crossing the gap of fear that makes you an adventurer. I like that. In referring to as jellies. And you got one thing that you did, which I didn't do, was the physical descriptions, the caricature physical descriptions.
Yes.
So the mother with the many chins and his own sort of like wobbly bits and stuff. This character of old Odelby and the people that surround him, you can feel there's a bit of indolence there.
Yeah.
Um, really liked it. I really liked it a lot. A child gone missing.
Yeah, it was really fun sort of concept to write because so many of his stories are about sort of youth and seeing things through the eyes of youth.
Yeah, it
And
definitely gave me strong the start of Great Expectations vibes.
yes,
Especially with the way that you played with horror as well. Um,
I think that's he's masterful with his use of dramatic irony and just sort of knowing, like Oliver Twist is a great example of us knowing as the reader what London is like, exactly what sort of man Fagin is, exactly what sort of situation this child is getting themselves into, and just having to watch it happen. And while Oliver does get the happy ending, sadly, young Odelby did not.
yeah, I think that it's a key difference between the two things because Oliver Twist is he's somehow like inured against the darkness of society that he is pushed through.
Yes.
Um, but you're right. You always see it from that angle, and you can see the people trying to exploit him and people trying to exploit other people around him that he doesn't realize that they're doing to each other. And yeah, he's something of a naive and still like a uh, undamaged soul, I guess maybe Dickens would have said. Like he's sort of
Yeah.
like that. Whereas your character is proof that Oliver Twist was incredibly lucky.
Very much so. Apparently, didn't live far enough north, from the sound of it. The
Yeah, the Great Expectations vibe was fairly strong for me. I understand the it's got closer ties to Twist, but I think this this child thinking the world is one way
hmm,
when it's another is a recurring theme through the life of Pip in Great Expectations as well. Because as soon as he
absolutely.
finds out one thing about the world, something else bushwhacks him.
Oh, cool. Now I know how it works. Wham.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The I'm amazed going back to because I hadn't read any Dickens since I was in school, and then in prep for this, I read a little bit. I read Christmas Carol because I thought it'd be fun after us having done our play back
yeah,
in December.
that was our Christmas special for those of you that haven't. Oh, Yule special. Sorry, for those that haven't listened to that yet, we wrote a very short radio play and performed it
Loosely based on the Christmas Carol.
extremely loosely based on Christmas Carol. So not the first time we've played with Dickens, actually. Then, yeah,
It's
it's a good
true.
point.
Often accused of playing with our Dickens, but the
Forever
it's
getting
incredible
taken
to
out of
me.
class.
It's just amazing how readable they are.
Oh yeah, big time.
Like a lot of older writing, and I know I'm really bad for this, but I struggle with it. I really struggle to read it. But it's not like that. In a weird way, it's like you can tell it was written for the common man.
Yeah,
It was meant to be in the newspaper. It was seen as trash, and while it's now revered as being part of the great lexicon, they were written to be sort of read on the back of a carriage while you're on your way somewhere, or and they still have that kind of easy vibe while packing in so much story, so much character. It's absolutely wonderful.
I fully agree, and I don't know whether you're aware of this, but do you know he didn't have any formal education.
Yes,
He was the common man.
his father went to prison, didn't he? So he had to
Yeah,
not be in school.
yeah. He worked in factories and stuff when he was 12, and then I think he somehow like blagged getting a job as a clerk, a legal clerk,
Oh wow,
and then taught himself how to write in that job. Is my understanding,
that's
at least,
crazy.
yeah. And then soon after that, that's why the Pickwick Papers are the first thing because it's all just absolutely sending up the the state of the legal system.
Yeah,
But yeah, so I think that's possibly why there isn't this like overly complex, almost academic and high society vibe to his writing. It is the kid that puts stickers on bottles of boot black
yeah.
writing
That's that's
with
so
just
cool.
natural mastery.
Yeah,
Um,
just clearly a born storyteller.
for sure, and a born writer, and and also just incredibly driven. Like to have written that much in that lifetime, plus all of the other stuff, like he was like a fairly fierce campaigner for like you know child working conditions and stuff, having done it a bit himself, um, and just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. So yeah, what an interesting life. 10 kids as well. 10.
10 bloody kids. I'll tell you one thing he did have. You know the having a bookcase that's a secret door in your study?
Oh yeah.
He had that.
Oh,
I reckon he's got to be the first. He's got to be the progenitor of that idea, isn't he?
I don't know. That's that's wild. What did it
But it
lead
had.
to?
I don't actually know where it went. All I know is I found a list of the fake book titles he put on the books that were on the shelves, such as The Life of a Cat in 9 volumes, which is just amazing. Ah, hang on. Uh, a fake door led to a room that is the most preserved in his house. Uh, Apparently, it just had a. Well, they've described it here as a Batman costume, but I'm assuming it's
What?
some sort of. I don't think it was actually a Batman costume. I'm guessing he had some kind of like just a sort of private study to himself. This was his bat cave, but that's very
Yeah.
strange.
I think that I don't know. That's sort of treading towards being a bit apocryphal there, isn't it? If they're
It
talking
might be a little bit apocryphal.
about, um, but I do know that he was yeah incredibly prolific and driven, and I seem to recall I can't remember where I was, so this might also be bollocks. Um, but I was at some kind of Dickens museum, or maybe it was like a Victorian museum, and then there was a bit of him. I don't know. Um, and it said that he used to go for like really long walks and stuff at night, and that like, he didn't sleep much basically, and then he would go to bed and wake up really early, or not really early, but pretty early, in order to just work in his study until the afternoon, which sounds like he was treating it like a day job.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean,
and I
if
think,
you had started off in a factory, you'd probably just get used to it, wouldn't you?
yeah, I guess so. It
So
does. It does lead to a question though about like when that it's quite important to find out when it's good for you to write. Some people don't get
yes,
a choice as to when they get to write, of course. But for me, I do find that the mornings are better. I find that I'm more productive. I'm sorry, less productive as the day goes on. My sort of brain goes from being um, productive and creative to being to desiring like social
that'll be
interaction.
the wine.
That will be the wine, probably the wine. Yeah, maybe Dickens did that too. But do you find that writing in the morning is better or worse, or
I
do you have
write
a
quite well
preferred
in the
time?
evening, but I think it's because I'm just used to being creative at night. You know, I'm in a like we said earlier, I'm in a band, and at nighttime is kind of when I get G'd up for making things. Like we write in the evening, we go to the studio, we write at night, and yeah, I think it's just become. habit for me now.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's like anything. It's worth building the habit if it's something you want to do. And I think I feel like we've probably both begun to do that over the last year or two of writing this many stories and performing them. So we often speak about like adaptations and stuff, um,
Yes.
and I'm now wondering, when you were saying like, I wonder how much of this is just your normal style, like how much Dickens is in my style to begin with.
Yeah.
I think possibly some of that is that because I not only my early childhood was like filled with like Jane Austen and the Brontes and stuff, but also the BBC did do a huge amount of Dickens adaptations in the 80s and 90s.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I remember really attaching myself to Martin Chuzzlewit of all books for some reason, because I don't think it's regarded as one of the better ones that he did, um, but I do like it a lot. And now I come to think about it, it has a lot of the things that we've been talking about. This like somebody finding out that the world's not all good and people having their own agendas and yeah, I can sort of see some through threads there into the stories that I normally tell. I think.
Okay.
And like the main character's got like sort of like a living by his wits sort of vibe to it, which I
Yeah.
think I play with quite a lot.
That's definitely your vibe.
Mm. But those were those they weren't. I wouldn't say they were like top level um, creations. Those adaptations, but they were interesting for sure.
So this
Keith Allen was in one of them. I seem to
oh,
recall.
wow. There's so many of them. What's your preferred A Christmas Carol?
Oh, um, I don't know whether I've got one.
You're not.
No, not really. I mean, there's the sort of joke answer of the Muppets Christmas Carol, isn't
I
there?
mean, that one is very good.
But it is good, and somehow they got Michael Caine trying to put in a serious performance, which other serious films have tried to do that in his later years and not succeeded. So I don't quite know how they got that, but
If he tried half as hard in Inception as he does in A Muppet's Christmas Carol.
yeah, he just absolutely spaffed it all on Chris Nolan's Batman trilogy.
Yeah, true. I would say Scrooged for mine. The
Oh, I've
Bill
not.
Murray
That's the Bill
one.
Murray one, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one.
Oh, well, you must.
Yeah, I'm a big Bill Murray fan, so I think yeah, it's a good story. I wouldn't. I think it's too attached to one particular thing. Obviously, in that case, Christmas.
Yes.
For it to be inside my like top three Dickens. I
Yeah.
think I think for me, Great Expectations is the heavy hitter. It's the top one.
Yeah.
Probably just because I read it at the right age and it stuck with me a bit more than the others. Um, then probably I think You Can't Get Away from Oliver Twist.
Yeah. It's just sort
Um,
of one, isn't it? It's
yeah,
one
for sure.
everyone knows.
And then probably third is Martin Chuzzlewit, just because I think I watched the adaptation too much as a child.
Yeah.
So I think the characters have just got a place in my head. Um,
That's fair enough, I think.
yeah, yeah. But would Christmas Carol be your top
I don't
Dickens?
know. I mean, I do have a lot of love for Great Expectations. Again, it's one we did at school, and I really fell in love with it.
Yeah,
But I think Christmas Carol is so effortlessly funny in a lot of ways. Like it has a very old sense of humor, obviously, but it does like the first 3 pages of that book are just reiterating the fact that Marley is dead in various ways. But there's a fantastic line right at the beginning where he says, uh, they talk about the phrase "dead as a doornail." He says, "Personally, I would have thought that a coffin nail was the most surely dead piece of ironwork a foundry could produce, but the wisdom of our elders tells us it's the doornail," which I think is absolutely brilliant.
so he's already playing with language. That's almost Pratchett-esque. That kind of
Yes.
taking an idiomatic phrase and breaking it down and making it funny.
Oh, are we both inspired by Dickens? Is this what's happened?
I think possibly, yeah, yeah. But we're
But
also,
I'm
I
just
mean,
thinking of
we also just like haven't mentioned other like this man's output was insane. If you think about like Bleak House was another absolutely massive one, really famous one.
Tale of Two Cities,
Tale of Two
obviously,
Cities.
yeah.
Little Dorrit. Also, that had a very good adaptation as well. That one, the Little Dorrit, is pretty good.
David Copperfield.
Nicholas Nickleby.
Bloody endless.
Absolutely. I mean, I haven't read any of his short stories. I don't think,
I don't think I have.
which is a bit
Probably would have
odd
been
considering we're
before
doing a
this.
short. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I've enjoyed this so much that I think I probably will go away and see if I can get a hold of a couple of them and read them.
I reckon so. I wanted to bring up as well his last book, the unfinished book,
Oh,
The
the one
Mystery of
that
Edwin Drood.
yeah, I remember that had some sort of funny title like that.
Yeah, that's such a fascinating thing to me,
What unfinished?
especially. Well, it's unfinished, but there've been multiple adaptations that have tried to finish it, but there's no official ending still.
Huh.
Even though there's been like 2 or 3 radio plays, a couple of TV adaptations, like it's all there, but none of them are the ending because
How
there were no
strange.
notes from Dickens. He wasn't a plotter, so there are no notes on, and this is what actually happened to Edwin. So we just don't know. So people have been making up endings for it.
That is, yeah, that is pretty confusing, isn't it? For such a literary great, I guess. But it happens more than you think. Like I think a lot of, especially writers that are this driven, they've always got something on the back burner.
Yeah.
You know, if they get hit by a car or go down to a stroke or whatever it is, somebody goes to their desk and goes, "Oh shit, there's 300 pages here."
I mean,
It's just
it's since
Tolkien was another one for that, wasn't he? Like with his
Tolkien, I was
son.
gonna say, since Tolkien passed away, there's just Chris every so often just seems to go, I found another one. It's behind the
Yeah.
sofa.
Whenever he's got a bill to pay, he goes and has a little bit of a rifle through his dad's writing desk. I think we're possibly being a bit unfair to Chris Tolkien there because he has done a really good job at
He's putting some excellent work. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But it must be strange though uh, to have your creative and writerly life defined by your what your father wrote.
Yeah.
That's a really strange situation.
It's a hard act to follow as well, isn't it?
I just feel like the natural inclination of most people would be to go the entirely the opposite, the other, just go the other way. Like, if
Schlock airport romance novels.
definitely, yeah, just completely outsell Tolkien.
I keep the characters in them though.
Just Aragorn and Legolas looking each other lovingly over a glass of wine. Just
There is no difference to what's in those books, Ben.
it takes a suggestive bite of lembas bread.
Sing me another song, Legolas.
Can you imagine?
Don't mind if I do.
Can you imagine a worse like food type to be suggestive and coy and erotic with than lembas bread? Like it would just because you'd be chewing it for fucking 5 minutes.
Just going into the room, Legolas is there, a bit of lembas spread on each nipple.
What are they like spikes? They spiked through it, just sort of.
I sort of meant gently placed.
Oh right, oh, okay. I thought we were going into like elf anatomy for a moment. The absolute needle nipples on him.
Ah, good old needle nips. Legolas needle nips, they called him.
So I think Charles Dickens would be horrified at the way this conversation has turned away from his.
Almost certainly.
So I'm not aware of any. We often pick authors that have, and we find out afterwards that they have some kind of like horrendous um, stain on their reputation and character from something that they said or did. I'm currently not aware of any that Dickens was involved in. I think, for the most part, he seems to have been a good person with like looking at trying to look after children in society and spent most of his time writing. Apparently, he was a bit mean to his wife, claiming that.
Don't worry, I found it for you. I thought I'd have a check.
Oh Christ! Okay, go on then. What did you do?
He had an affair with a teenager.
How
Oh, she
young?
was 18. She was 18. Fuck
Yeah, but
off.
how old was
That's
he? Was he
fine.
like 60?
45.
Okay,
It's quite bad.
that's not great,
That
is
is
it?
actually quite bad.
It's not great. I guess technically at the time it wouldn't have been a problem, but apart from the affair part of it,
The,
but Still, I think
These
that's a bit
facts
unpleasant.
are. I've just found another good one though, which is that whenever one of his pets died, he would taxidermy them himself.
Oh, oh, that's a bit ripe, isn't it?
Yeah, that's.
I
Oh
can
my
only
god,
assume he wasn't a professional taxidermist as well, so it was probably,
he
you see the bad
hobby obscure.
taxidermy, yeah, where they've got like their eyes askew and stuff.
His letter opener had an ivory letter opener that was topped with a stuffed paw of his favourite cat, Bob. That is wonderful.
So was he obsessed with cats then? Because of those fake book titles and stuff earlier.
I guess so.
They have a cat
Apparently, he's
thing.
obsessed. He liked prostitutes as well. Apparently,
Who doesn't, Nick?
it's Victorian England. Like that was not an uncommon hobby, was it?
No. I guess it must have been fairly early Victorian London though that he was inhabiting. He possibly saw a
Yeah.
changeover. Maybe that's why it was so fresh, and like stuff like Oliver Twist and Great Expectations
A
and stuff
woman on the throne. Not,
like
not that I've got anything to say about it.
tugs at his big goatee.
That's delightfully fitting, as right here in England we're celebrating the Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee.
It's we are jubilant. Apparently, we've been informed by the state media that we must be jubilant.
I know she's rich, but I never knew she had platinum jubilees. That's amazing, isn't it?
Just absolutely banging Perils. That's
coming,
horrendous.
coming home to find out your nan's died, but she's left you her solid tits. That's
Yeah, it's a jubilant weekend here, but
very intense here
I think
here in the UK.
largely managed to avoid bunting of any kind.
It's no, it's everywhere. Don't go outside.
Don't go outside. Yeah, no, I have been outside. There's only one person in on my sort of street that has bunting out, because I live in a bit of a like a multicultural area. Like there's a Danish family next door and an American family the other side. So there's not a huge amount of British patriotism on display, or uh, I would say affected by some people.
We
'Cause-
uh, we
yeah.
we played a gig a couple of days ago on the Friday, right in the height of the Jubilee, and it was in Kent or France, whichever you want to call it, and at a pub called the Red Lion. And I've never seen so many Union flags in my life. People had them on hats. It was crazy.
Were they wearing like those bowler hats that are
Yes,
Union
yeah,
flags?
those ones. Yes,
Those are those are pretty special, you know.
interesting crowd to look out into. I have to say, like looking at a flotilla.
Well, hopefully people have enjoyed our natterings about Charles Dickens and around Dickens and the stories. I've been really enjoying these right likes this on season 4.
Yes,
I feel like it's teaching us a lot, and we're getting to really have fun and look around into people's styles that have sort of defined what writing is now in the modern era,
I think we're
sort of contemporary.
both going to go away and read a load more Dickens from the sound of it.
Absolutely, we're going to get our Dickens, yeah. All right, brilliant. Until next time.
See you out there.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we?
For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?